which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we'll open up the meeting with public comment on items not on the agenda. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to the 10 o'clock item, RFPs for solid waste. We're waiting for Corey to come down for his recommendation on this. Is there any public comment that we want to go before Corey comes down? Call up there and see if he's going to.
Answering machine come on, so maybe it's on the way down. Yeah, there he is.
Okay, we're ready for it.
All right.
Just hanging out in the doorway to see if something else is going.
No wonder you didn't answer your phone. I just tried to call.
Oh, is that you? Okay. I thought it was a law enforcement officer. I figured I better escape now or I'm never gonna get to my meeting.
So the floor is yours, sir.
All right. I've got a memo and there's a bunch of them on a copy machine that'll be down here in a minute. I'll set up here. So I was asked to just look at this this process of the solid waste board's request for proposal for a decision to basically get a long-term solution for the county's solid waste transfer and disposal. Our current contract is gonna expire this year, and so the board submitted or put out a request for proposal, received two bids, one from Lewis and Clark County Solid Waste Department and one from Tri-County Disposal, who we currently have a contract with. And then somewhere along the way, there were questions as to the process and the final outcome. So what I've done is I've reviewed really all the documents that I think I've got pretty much everything that's relevant. The request we put out, the answers that we received, the some correspondence email between board members, commissioners, Brian Hopkins from Mako, who I had at the beginning asked to assist us in designing the RFP, and then a fair amount of additional information, primarily from Tri-County. And I was able to visit with Jack Connors. I'm not sure if Jack's here. Jack Connors yesterday at length. Visited with Brian Hopkins extensively as well. And what I'll do is I'll tell you my summary, and then probably what I really did is I addressed mainly a legal memo that I received from Jack last week that asserted their concerns with the process. And so I'll kind of walk through those and give you my take on them. To begin with, what I recommend to the board, and I sent you an email to this effect last night as I was finishing this memo, is that due to procedural errors in this RFP process, that the commission cancel the solid waste RFP. And it's not, and my biggest concern with this, which I'll get to, is not just the procedural errors. There were some. I don't consider them fatal, but I consider them that there were several, and they were enough that at least some folks might have a cause for a complaint. But the biggest concern I really have is that after the RFP process was done and the board scored it and then provided the recommendation to the commission, then this thing seemed to shift into a whole different type of process. It went from a bidding to a lobbying process. And that, I think, interjected some concerns that today, if you guys were to award it today, would it be based on the RFP? Would it be based on the additional information, et cetera? And so I have 10. I wasn't sure how big of a crowd here, so if we need to make more copies, we certainly can. So I'm recommending that the board cancel the RFP and then determine, and there's copies if anybody wants them.
Yeah, I do share. Did you guys okay?
Anything more?
Sure, I'll take it.
And we can make more if we need to. So I'll just walk through this. I think that's the best way to go. So first thing, our Tri-County says that the process is flawed. And I think we all are at the point where we know that, for example, when it was sent out the first time, it was sent out with some, I think a page or two missing, and then the subsequent document that went out to remedy that had some errors as well. And so there was a concern there, and I'm not sure that it went to everybody that would have even been interested as a bidder. So there's a concern there that at the outset we had some flaws. There's also a concern that Tri-County had that Lewis and Clark County asked some follow-up questions as they were preparing their bid, their proposal, and the board provided those answers to them, but didn't then affirmatively send those answers out to all the potential bidders. The RFP doesn't actually say that it would do that, so I don't know if that one is as a concern. I know Tri-County could have asked the board before it finalized its proposal, hey, has anyone asked questions and provided answers, and could you send those to us? But on the whole, I think there's some bumps in the road on this process. It is important to note that the Montana Procurement Act, which governs kind of the procedures for proposals and bids like this, doesn't actually apply to local governments. So if this was a state agency and some of these details were procedural errors, would be considered a pretty big deal under that act. They're not necessarily as big a deal under a county act. But as a whole, I think some of their concerns are well taken. Second point they had, they're claiming that one of the solid waste board members has a conflict of interest. So Chris, as I understand, Chris Asplund is an employee at Lewis and Clark Landfill, and they're saying he shouldn't have participated in the board's decision. So I've provided in the past some pretty extensive legal memos analyzing conflict of interest, and there's apparent conflicts, there's actual conflicts, and then sometimes there's just the possibility of a conflict. So I would say the fact that Mr. Asplund works at Lewis and Clark County Landfill is a possibility of a conflict of interest, maybe even an apparent conflict. In the circumstance like that, what I would recommend he do is advise the board before any actions, hey, I work at Lewis and Clark County Landfill, or certainly at the point when there's a proposal received by Lewis and Clark County, at that point say, hey, I work for this entity that just submitted a bid. the question is whether it's an actual conflict of interest. If you look at the statutes, the issue is whether that person, by participating, has a monetary gain or some other interest associated with it. In this case, it appears the facts bear out that his job is unaffected by the decision. He's not going to lose his job. He's not going to get a bonus. He's not, whatever may happen. So it's possible that he does not have an actual conflict of interest. What I would ordinarily advise someone in this case to do is to go ahead and recuse themselves anyway to ensure that they aren't inadvertently tainting the process. I don't know if that would have avoided this because he wasn't the tie-breaking vote on the board, but in future I would recommend certainly that he advise the board that he works there and then consider, and I'd be happy to talk to him in more detail, consider whether he should recuse himself. The third one is the claim that the scoring matrix was flawed. I don't agree with this one for a couple reasons, and we will have to dig into actual documents. If you look at what they were advised that the score would be based on, it would be based on technical and operational abilities as well as cost, with cost being the larger category or the more heavily weighted category, but the technical and operational ability is still a significant part of the vote. And then if you go into the detailed description of what the technical and operational abilities category consists of, I'm having a hard time finding it. It consists of facility design and compatibility with existing Broadwater County waste collection and transportation equipment, flexibility of access to site, including specific proposal of hours of operation, and special handling requirements. So what Tri-County is saying is they, after the fact, submitted a bunch of information about their facility and how the scale system is I guess more user-friendly in that the driver doesn't have to actually dismount and do all these things. And some really good detail. Well, I think that description of their scoring process gave them sufficient notice that they should have known that if they had a marked advantage over Lewis and Clark County because of their design at their gauge or whatever it may be, or their scale, that they should have known they needed to put that in. They may then well have had the advantage over Lewis and Clark on that scoring point, which may have tipped the balance of the whole thing. And then secondly, there are a couple places, and I believe it's 4.5. In 4.5, they're invited to submit any additional information, requirements, suggestions, or proposals that may be relevant to these requirements. That's a very open-ended question. So that would have been an obvious place if they believe they have a marked advantage over other facilities and they have all this great information that they provided later. That would have been the obvious place for them to place it. So the reason that wasn't considered is because Tri-County didn't submit it, and I don't think that shows a flawed scoring system. I think there's evidence there's indication and notice that they should have done that, or could have provided it. Let me say that they don't have to. The last point is Tri-County's claim that the board did not follow your guidance for additional information. This, I think, brings us to the biggest problem we have with this process, which is at this point, this thing went from a bidding to a lobbying process. The commission got the recommendation and vote from the board, which in the scoring process shows a slight edge to Lewis and Clark County. I guess let me back up one more thing. Tri-County also provided later a bunch of information about cost analysis and how if you look at not just the direct cost per ton, but you look at mileage and transportation and turns and different things like that, and really maybe the ergonomics of how one would take Route A or Route B, that over time Lewis and Clark's would consume more employee time and therefore cost the county more. Great analysis. That would have been also information that could have been provided in their proposal originally when it went to the cost issue. And that may have also then made the board go $29 versus 26 or whatever it was, but we have these other things to look at. That information wasn't provided originally and certainly could have been, because it was likely foreseeable that Lewis and Clark was gonna be one of the bidders. They could have also done the same kind of analysis comparing themselves to Logan or anyone else that was a potential bidder in the area. So the fact that they did provide that on the front end is then leading us to point 4, which is the claim that now, after they recognize it and get it, they should provide this additional information on the back end. And then they're suggesting that the commission should tell the board, you need to now go back and reconsider all this information. Well, at this point, what happened is the board was really not comfortable with it and said, well, these guys don't even have a complete application. And the incompleteness of their application was really minor. And it's pretty hard to say, after you've accepted a proposal and scored it, then to say it's not complete. But really what we have here is a concern that we're gonna either go back and redo the RFP under threat of, PR campaign and this lobbying and threats of lawsuits, right? That seems to be a little more coercive, and that also seems to be leading to, for local officials, a concern that if we don't pick you, we're gonna get bashed over the head. And that's what I think is the biggest problem here. Now, up until very end, I thought that was all one-sided. Now, I do have an email that I received from Mr. Connors where there was also some additional conversations between some Lewis and Clark employees and the board with additional information. I'm only aware of the one conversation. It certainly wasn't to the level of the additional information that was provided, but it raises concern for me that there was additional information by both parties. So that's where I have the biggest concern here. Even this morning in the newspaper, in the IR, there's an article of Bibb County has unfair advantage in landfill bidding. I mean, at that point, what's happening is the integrity of the RFP process is kind of being thrown out. And it's very hard for a commission to take what was an objective scoring process, and then you need to make a decision, and certainly you receive public comment, and certainly people are able to come forward and provide additional information, and that's all part of our process. But it's hard at this point to kind of go back to just pure RFP information and look at that when we have all these other things coming in. Extensive information, that's great information, wasn't in the original RFP. Side conversations that may have happened with Lewis and Clark County, PR campaign that, and the fact that I'm getting calls from Lewis and Clark County, frankly, the whole thing is messy. It's really messy. And I spent some time with Brian Hopkins at Mako yesterday as well, and we went through all this, and he said, gosh, you kind of want to just start over. And so my recommendation is that we start over. And I also have some recommendations on the last page. So first of all, as I understand it, Tri-County, and I understand they have representatives here, I'll let them address this to the commission. I understand that they've offered that if we restart over and we don't have a solution right away, that at the time that the current contract expires with the county, they'd be willing to continue that contract on a month-to-month basis. And if they do so, I would recommend that we have that as our stopgap, so we have someone still handling our waste while we get to our long-term solution. But then secondly, for a future RFP, I recommend the board enforce them. When I say the board, I'm back to the solid waste board, a board discipline process. So number one, quality control of documents, ensuring that everything that goes out is to the correct addressee, that everything's complete and looks good, and that if there's someone that has questions, that there's someone that can immediately get a response to those questions, and also maybe just advise the other parties that if you want answers to those questions, let us know, we'll send them to you, whatever. Third, prohibit communication outside of the RFP process from anybody, other than questions. And again, those questions then and answers will be provided to all the parties. So it'd be fair. And then if there's any potential conflicts of interest, that the board be advised of those before they make scoring. And then I further recommend that the RFP include a proviso that lobbying or threats outside of, against the board or the county in advance of a final decision will be deemed a violation of the process and cause for rejecting a bid. Because if we don't do that, the RFP is nothing more than phase one, and phase two is how many articles can I get in the newspaper, or how many conversations can I have with a friend of mine who works somewhere, and if it'll undermine your ability to make the best decision based on the best information that's most fair to everybody. I also understand that, and Brian again suggested that if we wanted to pursue an interlocal agreement with Lewis and Clark County, we could find out if they're interested. I have no idea if they're interested in that. But I think those are probably decisions for not this moment. I think the decision for this moment is if we cancel the RFP, and then secondly, is Tri-County willing to continue the current contract on a month-to-month basis until we get a final solution. So that's my report. I'm sure I've generated a whole lot of conversation behind me, so I'm sure I'll set aside and see if people have either questions or comments. Do you have any questions for me before I step aside?
I don't.
I don't have any questions. Anyone have any more public comment or questions for Cory? Okay, seeing none, I guess we go on. I guess we would entertain a motion to eliminate this RFP process, the ongoing RFP process, return this to the board and see if they want to proceed with RFPs or if they want to go into an interlocal agreement with Lewis and Clark County.
I would move that we go ahead and follow the county attorney's advice and want to have his language, which I don't see readily on the top of my head. But yeah, just cancel the RFP at this point and send it back to the board, the solid waste board.
I'll second.
Is Tri-County still willing to do this month-to-month contract with us until we get this thing straightened out? Okay. Motion's been made and seconded to scrap this present RFP and send it back to the solid waste board to see what their recommendation is. All in favor? Aye. Opposed, same. Motion carries. So John, I guess the ball is back in your hands.
Thanks.
That thanks a lot, right?
I have a question on that. If the solid waste board decides to pursue an interlocal agreement, is that really the role of an advisory board to begin that process, or should that be pushed up to the commission or in the hands of the county attorney? Because we're dealing with non-elected officials dealing with Broadwater County funds. I think a decision should lie with the commission that are elected by the people of the county and not an advisory board.
No, I would think that would be the commissioners, the county attorney, and Lewis and Clark counties, same elected officials going on with that interlocal agreement.
We
Okay.
also, just for your information, Corey interviewed yesterday for the public works supervisor,
Okay,
so that's another element that needs to be part of the picture.
would you want that person to be on board before you go through a process like that then, an interlocal, or?
I would say yes, out of respect for them.
I would also think that that person should be included.
Yeah, I'd say so too.
Well, and it might make sense then to, for us to do a little fact gathering, and then maybe we have a meeting at some point on, if we do an RFP and it's expedited, here's how long it would take, et cetera. And then if we pursue a interlocal, first find out if they're even interested, and then kind of what that process would be. It might, and I'm not sure if that'd be a board look at that and give a recommendation to the commission, or the commission just say, you know, I'm sure whatever option you guys wanna do, you want the board to, you know, wanna do that one and not think it's not workable, for example, so.
I would think that we would go through all those negotiations with Lewis and Clark County amongst the commissioners and the attorney, and then have the board on board, so if they have something that they wanna put in there, we can listen to suggestions from them.
Okay.
We could have some joint meetings or whatever you want.
I see a long process, I see a process of gathering a lot of information. So, yeah, the more people we have involved, the more facts we can gather, we can make the best decision on how to move forward.
So we'll await the board's decision on what you wanna do with that, and then we'll go from there.
I thought you guys made the decision that you would gather facts and stuff too. Or just tell me when you want the next meeting.
Well, we just need to know from the board if you want us to prefer an RFP, or do you want us to pursue the interlocal agreement, or whatever, what your choice is there.
Okay. Can we poll them by email?
Should be able to.
Okay.
You know, if we are thinking about possibly an interlocal agreement, would we not be wise to still consider the RFP, again, in that fact gathering mode? Because a new RFP would give us more facts to weigh against an interlocal to see what the most financially beneficial option for Broadwater County is, correct? Does one preclude us from the other? This is my question.
No, I don't think it does. I think bidders might get tired if they go through a second RFP and then it gets canceled and to do an interlocal. I don't know. It might be worth even doing some kind of a, so we had two bidders. I mean, how many eligible bidders would have been in the area? Really just these two, or would Logan as well? Is it worth even just an official call to anyone else in the area and say, if we put out another one, are you guys interested in receiving it and putting a bid out? Could do some kind of unofficial fact gathering, but I don't know, someone in the room probably has expertise beyond me on that. Well, guaranteed, everyone in the room has expertise beyond me in that. Does anyone wanna pipe up and give us that idea?
The board could pursue that.
Pursue that, just to find out if there's anyone else interested, so. Jack, you are gonna say something back there?
Yeah, I guess my concern about the interlocal agreement is if it's used as a method to shortcut the RFP process and not get the best price for Broadwater County. I believe my client's proposal was the best value for Broadwater County. And if the interlocal agreement is used as a way to not put this as a competitive bid, and then just take the price, this Clark County bid already, and use that as the basis for an interlocal agreement, I don't think that's gonna get the best outcome for the residents of Broadwater County, which is ultimately what this should be about. And on the second bidding and the second RFP, I don't think it's gonna take a long time. Logan may or may not do a proposal. The landfill up in Great Falls receives waste from as far as Livingston, so it might be interested in doing a proposal. And then my client is definitely willing to look at it and consider even bidding lower than the first time, so it might result in an even better outcome for the county in the second RFP.
Is there anyone else south that's in the area? I mean, is there Jefferson County or
No.
not close, right?
Next closest one would be Butte.
Have you guys ever considered hauling the Toston stuff south and the Townsend stuff and other stuff north, or it doesn't, that much mileage just doesn't save you anything? Okay. Well, I guess I recommend send it to the board, let them do kind of their mull it over and get back to you in terms of which route to pursue. I can still do some initial work on what a second RFP would look like in terms of, I mean, the documents are pretty well done. We might tighten up a couple things based on my recommendations in this memo. And then, I can kind of informally find out from Lewis and Clark County attorney if they know the temperature of their commission. My guess is they don't, because I don't think this thing's come to them, so there might be something where they have to pull them or something, so. We could probably in a couple weeks, probably come back with something to tell you, is my guess. Is that too soon if it's 2 weeks, Joe?
It depends on the public works director,
Okay.
when they would be taking over.
Yeah, that's right. So maybe after that person's on board then? Okay. All right, I'll start working on it and I'll email you and I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think
Dave, you just had one more thing.
I just wanted to add that, you know, in the RFP, there wasn't an opportunity to take a look at options. The price was in there for tonnage at the landfill and hauling. But to go into extensive ideas on hauling, we have the permit to haul out of Broadwater County. I've got permission from Republic Service, which has the southern part of the county, which is Toston and Raidersburg. And we have their permission to extend our mileage limit down to there, and we could, in an RFP process, we could offer the hauling out of those box sites instead of everything going to Indian Creek and being dumped out and reloaded. So there's a lot more involved in doing, you know, a different type of RFP. You're asking for a total price with other options, and I mentioned that in the first RFP, but we have to have some direction from the board or from the commission as to what they're willing to accept for options and costs.
You guys want to just put this on the agenda somewhere in maybe that second or third week of May? And we could by then have some answers for you?
Yes, sir.
Corey, do you mind if I?
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Charles Lane, Lewis and Clark County Attorney's Office. So, you know, we weren't privy to this memorandum from the Crowley Law Firm to Broadwater County. Looking at it right now, there's an accusation that Lewis and Clark County engaged in conversations with Broadwater County outside of the RFP process. We have been extremely careful to comply with the provisions of the RFP, specifically the notice at the beginning that offerers are not allowed to communicate with any county staff or officials regarding this procurement other than interviews, demonstrations, and or site visits It's except at the direction of supervisor or other designee of Broadwater County Solid Waste. There's mention of an email that discusses contact between Mr. Hahn and the Lewis and Clark. I haven't seen that email, but I believe that those discussions were initiated by Mr. Hahn, which is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, that's accurate.
That's correct. So that's in compliance with the RFP. Lewis and Clark County has been very careful to be in full compliance with this RFP. I don't believe the same can be said for other parties, the other offerers in this RFP process. This whole thing has been tainted from the beginning. There's been a kind of a propaganda campaign against this. The result today is that the RFP will be thrown out. All of Lewis and Clark County's cards are on the table. What we bid is what we already bid. If another RFP goes out, everyone knows what our offer is. So, Lewis and Clark County complied with the provisions of this RFP, and for it to be thrown out now is a little upsetting.
Could I add to that too? I had initiated the call to Audra after they had their solid waste meeting, and it would have been a public meeting. And so it was public information that I received and passed on to the commissioners, if that makes any difference or not.
And just to clarify, I don't believe my clients violated the RFP in any way either. All of our information has been submitted at public meetings as public comment on this process or a response to requests for additional information when this commission voted to go back and hold the Wednesday night meeting and seek more information from my client and Lewis and Clark County. Lewis and Clark County did not go to that meeting, did not vote or avail itself of the opportunity to provide the additional information the commissioner asked it to seek.
You want a little further explanation from me? Just so the email that has been referred to, I received, I don't know, late Friday. I had court Friday, so I didn't even really look at it till Monday. So I didn't have a chance to go into great detail on it. It as I understand it from and all I got is the email chain. What I got, and I understand that Mr. Hahn did reach out to them for some information. So I'm not sitting here saying Lewis and Clark violated. What I'm saying is I didn't have enough time to dig into all the details there, and I just had a concern that maybe in fact there was some information that was going on. So I'm not disagreeing with Charlie at all. My big concern when I talk about all the additional information and the lobbying campaign, it is Tri-County. And I told Mr. Connors this. I said, your client is engaged in this, what appears to be a bullying campaign, and that's not helpful to the process. So on a going forward basis, if there's another RFP, I think everyone should be on notice that if we start getting the state association sending us letters and talking about lawsuits and and those kinds of things, or even in meetings like this where there's threats of lawsuits, that's not helpful to getting to the best information for you to make a decision, and can be considered improperly influencing the RFP, I believe, and tainting the RFP. So that's the majority of what I was referring to. As far as Lewis and Clark, I was just on the side of caution because I didn't have time to pursue all the conversations that may have happened. I was referencing the fact that there may have been something, but I'm not trying to tell you, Charlie, that there was a violation. I apologize if I wasn't clear with my words. But I think that just, I guess, stand by the recommendations in my memo. On a going forward basis, I think that we can insert some safeguards in the process to ensure that everyone's on notice. Hey, don't call and provide this unless you're gonna do it as in the process where you provide a question or something in writing, and then know that everyone's gonna have access to that information, that kind of thing.
Okay, we're running a little late, so we'll move on to our budget discussion here.
He wanted to kick it in his board, he was gonna email his board, and he wanted to make sure it's still easy.
Yeah, if you want, we can chat after. Or I can send you an email.
Just send me an email.
Sure.
Just to clarify.
Sure. Thanks, John.
Yeah. I didn't know it was gonna be like that.
Has it not helped me stop by?
No.
It's been like 2 times. So a year or so ago, property transferred to the account.
We have to be done by noon because we have a conversation scheduled.
They applied
This is us.
on like a course in the fall for the snow. Because they're volunteers and because it's public property, they can't purchase or buy the chemicals. They're trying to figure out pains on them. Well, and they would do it, because you can, government application,
I had this up there because you just stuck a brown thing in the back.
have the ability to do it. They need an umbrella.
Insurance or license?
A boat. And probably, yeah, I mean, if you're. So, but the Department of Ag requires a turf ornamental endorsement. County has it, city
I
would.
can explain if you want to,
Okay.
and leave questions
So-
for you if you want.
I suggested that we need to speak with you, I don't know if that's outside of your realm or anything, or if you're willing to help with.
I guess we'll just use it.
Okay, I can see both sides here. I'm just trying to, make sure it's okay.
Yeah. And I-
Good.
Sure, how long does it go, even like, how does it take hours, or is it like a multi-day deal? So, anyway, no, I seem knowledgeable.
That's good.
They're just trying to get figured out, and like I said, they hire out majority of the work. It's just what they do. Trying to figure out how to make it happen, so. And I don't know if the city can play along, at all. But,
Thank you.
kind of made a landscape difference that happened,
Okay.
and so we kind of acquired that land.
How are you?
Good.
Good. I'm good, how are you?
I didn't ask, man, I don't know if it's.
Ready?
Whenever you are.
Okay, we're ready to go here. What are we gonna do here? We just wanna discuss this.
Well, what we need to do is let people know what the foundation is, what their starting point is. You want me to do that?
So we sent a referral to ESP Main Street.
Right, right. I brought the tax levy requirement sheets that we went through the SWAT.
So basically what the budget looks like is froze at 2018 minus 2%. Compensation board will meet at noon today. What was the COLA was 2.5.
The CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index, is 2.1, and that's generally the starting point for COLA discussion,
Okay.
so we'll be starting at 2.5.
have questions or input here before we, anything?
Mr. Chairman, has the decision been made to freeze all budgets at -2%?
That's been the discussion, I'm not, that's the commission's doing, I'm not sure if that's what everybody can live with or not. That's kind of our financial restriction.
On behalf of Doug and as an elected official and myself personally, I think all budgets should be frozen at the same amount. At the same percentage, let me put it that way.
2% reduction.
What, how is that gonna affect public safety and union negotiations?
Every other budget is being asked to cut expenses. That is public safety's responsibility as well.
Mike Debbie's here now, I saw her come in.
So what we're being asked to do is prepare our initial budget with 2% decrease.
Yeah. Or if you have to go, you would have to, you have to provide your revenue to go over that, or a way to come up with that revenue. And I guess the thing that I see is, I don't know how, with all this Department of Corrections stuff going on with public safety, I don't know how are you gonna be able to even meet revenue from what we had last year?
Absolutely not.
How far under are you gonna be?
We're working on it, but it's anywhere 400,000 or 500,000 short. We've been pretty much cut in half of what inmates we receive. And we are currently working to try to get a better number of what revenue we can expect. It's just that's my estimated prediction, so.
We don't have any idea if our mills are going up or what as far as value, or is our mill value going up, or do we know?
We get the valuations the first Monday in August. As far as the mills, we don't know. Things are changed now that there's the 2-year cycle versus the 6-year cycle. And I think it was a surprise to everybody that we lost the 5.19 mills last time. We still ended up to the positive. Our growth was 9.6, I think. We lost 5.19 mills. That reduced our growth to 3.9. We still grew, but we still had the loss of mills. We took that only from the general fund and the standalone funds, which are airport, extension fare, search and rescue, health insurance, museum fare. So yeah, what'll happen this year, we don't know. We do expect at least a 5% growth in new construction, which is growth that we can realize. There is a statute, it's 1510-420, and what it says is, with existing construction, with existing businesses, counties are only allowed to grow by 0.5%. That's why we lost the mills. Our growth was at 9-point-something% because the valuations had increased by so much. To offset that, they took away our mills so that we were reduced to that 0.5% growth. The 3.9 was almost exclusively new growth, new homes, new businesses, that kind of thing. The 5% we expect this year is new growth. The reason that we're not able to just continue what we've been doing is we've got to rebuild our reserves. We have too many departments that are going into January with very little, if any, money for operations from July to November. This has been built over the past, or been depleted over the past couple of years of spending reserves before the end of the year. We've got to end that, and it's going to be a couple of years of just tightening our belts to get to the point where we rebuild those reserves. And that's really the focus this year, is on reserves. Any questions on that? If I may, Mr. Chairman, I sent out, the commission put together or agreed to a couple of things. One is the SWOT that you guys have in front of you, that was passed out. It's very shorthand if anybody has questions on that. We did go through it in a public meeting. I don't feel we need to do that again, but if you have any questions or want definitions on any of the shorthand, we're more than happy to go through that with you. And then also, these were put together for each department, and it is was emailed out this morning as well. These are tax levy reports. This is just another tool for budgeting. So when we build the budgets, what you guys do is you have 4 years of projected and actual spending, projected and actual revenue. That's what you use to build your budget. We're going to be doing a 101 next week with Debbie. But this is a different view, and if you guys don't have them, I have everything but mosquito. For some reason I forgot to print out mosquito. We District Court Road and General Fund for everybody that's here. And what it does is it shows you what your expenditures were, actuals, and what your mill levies brought in. Also what other ancillary revenue brought in, and then what your cash reserves were. And this is where you really see where those cash reserves have been just frankly overspent and going down every year. That's what we have to rebuild, because that is what you use for operations July to November. So if anybody didn't get yours, they're up here. You're more than welcome to them. And I can go through those if you don't know what they are or want an explanation. Does everybody have their tax levy reports? I do not, because you're not on the agenda, but you're more than welcome.
Well, fine.
I know,
I see
yeah.
how you are.
I might actually have yours, just in kind of my cheat sheets. No, I brought only the others.
Okay.
Sorry. But if you want to come and grab a general fund one, I am going to go through it because I think sometimes people are hesitant to ask questions. This is what the commission uses to build the full budget every year. Ours is 3 pages. Yours is a little bit smaller. Ours is also a font of 8. This is, thank goodness, a whole lot bigger than that. The first column is the fiscal year, so you guys know the fiscal year is, this is fiscal year 18. Expenditure budget, for the previous years, that is your actual expenditure budget. For the year we're on, and when we put in 19, that will be your approved expenditure. So it'll be the same, if not a little bit less than last year's. Your cash reserves, that is what we're talking about. So if you look at the general fund, you can see where that went from 262,000 to 8,000. That's what you guys, the whole general fund, which is maintenance, I'm looking at the people who are here, accounting, clerk, recorder, treasurer, and elections, commissioners, Also includes the county attorney, justice of the peace, sanitarian, public health. Did I miss anybody, Debbie? Oh, DES.
Have all my money.
Mhm.
Are they planning, are they part of it?
Nope,
No.
they're not. Okay, so those are the departments we're talking about right now. They have $8,800 for all operations from July on. We instructed, excuse me, every single one of those departments to cut 10% last year through this year. That was a compromise between Mike and I. I had suggested a 5% cut at the beginning of the year. He had said, no, let's give him a 10% cut, but through the entire year to realize that. Bottom line is, it looks like one department within the general fund has saved that 10%. So that will be added to our cash reserves. We're gonna have to get tight, and we're gonna have a strong plan to get those reserves back. So, so your third column is columns 1 and 2 added together. It's your cash reserves from the last year plus your expenditures. Then you go into, and that'll balance out. So then you go to your cash balance. That's the money left over at the end of the year. Debbie, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. Your non-tax revenue, that's column 5. That's grants, entitlement share, interlocals. Your property taxes are column number 6, and that's just strictly your mills, revenue from mills. That's the property taxpayers in our community. Total revenue is those columns put together. Total resources is includes your cash balance from the end of the year. So it's just kind of an explanation of what you're looking at. And that's just another tool for you guys to use, building your budgets. We'll add to this through the years. And that's one of the things that kind of set off alarm bells, was looking at that different picture. We usually look at expenditures, revenue, and cash balance. Well, this puts it all into one, and it just gave us a different view that said, hey, we better address this now, or we're gonna have trouble in the future, in the near future. So, road, you guys are a standalone, you're solid. Especially with getting retro SRS.
Okay, I got a question here now. You said that second column is cash reserve.
Correct.
So, why, I guess the fiscal year 18, why is that down to $5,800? I guess I'm a little confused with this.
Same thing, you spent a little bit over your budget into your reserves. Here's the other thing we're gonna be doing this year, is those reserves are gonna be solidified in an account that nobody can get to without commissioner approval, and that'll be for specifically July 1 through. So my guess is you just went a little bit over, but with retro SRS, that's gonna infill that. So I'm not worried about it. I would be if you weren't getting SRS.
Yeah, and I'm a little confused, because I mean, I've never, I keep pretty close track. Is this because of this bridge stuff?
Oh, yes it is. Yes it is.
Okay.
You've paid out for the bridge, you have
We
not
haven't
got
got
it
it back.
back. Right,
Okay.
right. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Treasurer received a $200,000 payment just recently for the bridge.
And that will be reflected in here, but it's not yet, because at the time this was built, it